Hi everyone, I'm Louis Biondelillo from the Feliciano School of Business, bringing you this week's, our first of the semester, Feliciano Live, right here on Instagram. I'm really glad you're joining us today for our first one of the whole new decade, which is exciting. And I'm joined today by Dr. David Axelrod, and today we are talking about are negative rates and wealth taxes the solution? So thank you for being here, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
Good. Could you give yourself a little introduction? What do you do?
I teach in the economics department. I'm technically an instructional specialist, but I teach mostly introductory courses. I also have taught a new class called Economics of Time and Mind, and working on some other new course with the religion department.
All right. Thank you for that. And I just want to remind the viewers at home, if you've never joined us before, or if you have and you just want a reminder, any questions that you have, you can submit them down below, and we'll be sure to answer those for you as soon as possible. So send those questions down below, and we'll be excited to answer them. So we're going to get right into it. So why are negative interest rates an issue?
Well, to understand why negative interest rates are an issue, it's important to know what an interest rate is.
Right.
And I think most people understand, but let's just clue in a little bit. So that an interest rate is the rate of payment you have to make for borrowing money.
Okay.
So let's say you borrow $1,000 and it's a 10% interest rate per year. That means you're going to pay $100 for the privilege of using that $1,000 for the year.
Right.
And
most
then
people get that.
And most people get that. Now, one of the reasons why negative interest rates are an issue is many of the models in economics and finance assume a positive interest rate.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why we assume a positive interest rate is because we typically don't expect people and banks to pay you to borrow their money.
Right.
And that's what a negative interest rate basically means.
So wouldn't that be a positive thing for people? Why is this a negative thing?
Well, it would be a positive thing if you could borrow the money.
Of course.
All right. But if you're the one who's lending the money, why would you do it?
Right.
Just hold on to your money, okay? And then you've got more at the end of the year than paying someone to do it.
So there's a little bit of a similarity between negative interest rates and wealth taxes. What are those similarities?
Okay. So to understand it, it's useful to understand the concept of carry cost. Carry cost is the cost of owning an asset. So for example, let's say you own a home. You'll have to pay property taxes, there might be repairs, maintenance, all these other things. So just owning the property costs you something.
Right.
All right, so if you understand that, then the relationship between a negative interest rate and a wealth tax is it's associated with the cost of owning an asset. So if you own the money and you want to borrow, you want to lend it out, right, and there's a negative interest rate, you're paying someone to make sure that they give you the money back. Now, how does this relate to wealth tax? Well, it's similar in that if you're the one who owns wealth and the government says, okay, you have to pay us so that we can provide the protection for your rights, including your property rights, you can see how that's very similar.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for that. How does wealth inequality underlie many economic issues?
Okay, so at the core of wealth inequality affecting economic issues, it's useful to keep in mind that the demand for goods in an economy depends on what people prefer.
Sure.
And their ability to buy it, right? So,
absolutely.
So people who are wealthy are in a position to buy more.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're very wealthy, maybe you're a billionaire, you get to pay millions of dollars for a piece of artwork or an expensive yacht. But if you have no wealth at all and you have low income, there's not much you can buy. So why is that an issue? Because the market gets its signals about what to produce for society based on what people are willing to pay for them. Sure. So if you have a lot of inequality, then the signals come from the wealthy disproportionately. And so now you get to produce expensive homes, get expensive yachts, and not as much goes to things like health care and education for people who have little wealth.
And that's an issue for sure.
And that's an issue because it has to deal with how are you investing in people. Because things like education, healthcare, food, housing, they're not just consumption goods, they're investments in people.
Thank you for that. And if you're just joining us now for our Feliciano Live, our first one of the semester, I just want to remind you that we're here with Dr. David Axelrod. We're talking about our negative rates and wealth taxes, the solution for our issues here today. So that'll be our final question, so you can stick around for that. If you have any questions of your own, feel free to put them down in the comments below. And we actually have one right now, which is exciting. You ready?
Yes.
Straight from a viewer.
Excellent.
Here we go. In your opinion, should the Fed cut interest rates? President Trump is pushing for lower interest rates.
In my opinion, they probably should not cut them at this point.
Why?
Well, one of the reasons why you want to lower interest rates is to stimulate the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, you want to stimulate the economy when it's in recession.
Right.
Because you want to avoid going into a depression. In reality, our economy is pretty strong right now. We have very low unemployment. Those who follow the market know that it's near record highs. And part of the reason why it's that way is because interest rates are historically low already.
Right.
So if you continue to lower them, yeah, you get a little bump up. But when the economy turns, then you have no place to lower the interest rates.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So going back to our wealth tax issue.
Yeah.
Just remind the viewers, what is a wealth tax and who would pay the wealth tax? Say I won the lottery and I just won a small lottery and I won $500,000. Am I paying that wealth tax, or is it billionaires that are paying that wealth tax?
Most wealth tax plans are going to have a certain amount of deduction for wealth. So it's unlikely we would have a wealth tax where even if you had $100,000, you would see it.
Right.
Okay. It would typically be with multimillionaires and billionaires. But a wealth tax is going to be a tax on the value of the assets you have. So if you own a lot of property, okay, and that's, let's say, worth hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, then you might see a wealth tax on that. As a matter of fact, most people who own homes are familiar with the concept of a property tax.
Right.
That is just another form of a wealth tax.
Sure.
Property taxes have been used because you can't move homes. So it's an immobile asset.
So say that a wealth tax goes into effect. What would those funds be used for?
Well, the fact that there's a wealth tax doesn't automatically say what it's going to be used for.
Okay.
What it will be used for depends on the culture and the priorities and the needs of the society at that moment. And that's going to be dependent on things like, who the political leanings and ideologies of the policymakers at the time. So many people that are proposing the use of a wealth tax tend to be on the progressive side.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would like to use it for progressive reasons, which might mean to help fund education, okay, or improve health care, things like that.
We've seen some of the Democratic candidates talking about a wealth tax.
Exactly.
I believe it was Bernie Sanders,
Correct.
Elizabeth Warren,
Yes.
and Andrew Yang.
Yeah.
So those three candidates are some of the people that are looking into a wealth tax. And like you said, they are more progressive, so that makes sense.
Right.
So who's really against the wealth tax?
Predominantly conservatives.
Okay.
A high percentage are people who have a lot of wealth.
Well, sure.
So a lot of that is going to be dependent on certain trade-offs. What gets exempted, what are the deductions. The other thing is there a trade-off between wealth tax and income tax? And also whether or not, how it's going to be applied. Now, that's not to say there aren't some people that are very wealthy that understand that, there's a lot of privilege and abundance that comes from that, and they may see that as a reasonable part of the tax system.
We actually have another viewer question.
Yes.
So let's pull that in right now. Their question is, isn't a wealth tax penalizing Americans for being financially successful?
It's understandable to look at it that way,
Mm-hmm.
but there's another way of looking at it, and that is when you're very wealthy, you actually benefit more from governmental services. Okay, you might say, okay, well, how is that supposed to work? Well, look at it this way. You have your, your personal or civil rights, which are about your freedoms as a person.
Right.
But we also have property rights.
Mm-hmm.
And those property rights are protected by the government. So, for example, the military. The fact that we're reasonably safe inside our borders is because we have a strong military. Well, the more property you have, the more that's protected. Another thing is if you look at who gets to use federal courts and such, that's going to be predominantly people that have major lawsuits.
Right.
We're going to have major lawsuits, people with more money.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be reasonably argued that if the government wasn't there at all, then wealthy people would have to pay for their own protection,
Right.
okay, both in terms of some kind of a legal system or a military or a private police. And so that's at a cost that they would bear anyhow. So a wealth tax is in essence a payment for the protection services they receive.
So for a lot of Americans, this year, past few years, is the first time they've ever heard of something called a wealth tax. Has it been used in other countries, and was it successful in those countries?
It has been, or at least it's attempted to be used in
Okay.
other countries in the past. Most recently, many countries in Europe.
Okay.
And for many of them, they dropped it after a while.
Mm.
Part of the reason why is that unless most countries are using a wealth tax, if not all, it creates an incentive for those that have mobile assets. So again, we talked about property before being
Right.
immobile, so that's why you can get away with property taxes.
Sure.
But if you're talking about the ownership of stocks, bonds, those kind of financial assets, people will want to move those large amount of assets to countries that don't have a wealth tax.
So would you say that if the United States was to implement it and no other countries around it, it would hurt the United States? Is that?
Let's put it this way. If we're going to be realistic
Mm-hmm.
about the cost and benefits of a wealth tax, depending on how much the wealth tax is, we are likely to see some of the assets go abroad, which could impact the capital available to invest in the U.S. So again, anything in economics, you got to know what the cost and the benefits are.
Okay. So our final question here. Oh, okay. We have one more question here in here. Another listener question. Isn't a wealth tax a socialist idea?
Well, let's consider it this way. It is true that typically the wealth tax is more often proposed by those with socialist leanings, progressive ideas, because they're concerned about wealth inequality. But if you want to, you consider, was there anything like that in the past before we had a capitalist system? Well, you can go back to the time of feudalism. So let's go back 500 years, 1,000 years. Okay, so we didn't talk about capitalism then, but it was kind of understood. Well, there was the king, okay, it had their army,
Right.
and then there were the lords, and the lords had certain obligations to provide resources to the king.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who were the lords? The lords were the ones who owned the property and the wealth.
Right.
The serfs lived on the land, but they didn't really own the land. So even then, that notion of the equivalent of a wealth tax was there.
Interesting. All right. Thank you so much for answering that question.
Sure.
And our overarching topic today has been, are negative rates and wealth taxes the solution? So we've been talking about it. We've shown some facts leaning for, and we've shown some facts leaning against.
Yes.
So are negative rates and wealth taxes the solution?
Well, it depends what you're looking for as a solution now,
Okay.
isn't it?
Right.
For those who are seeking continued growth and the opportunity for individuals to be as successful as they can as an individual, wealth tax might be discouraged because, as the argument would be said, is it provides a disincentive for accumulating wealth.
Like we had in our question.
That's right. On the other hand, it depends on how large the wealth tax is.
Okay.
So, for example, an income tax, well, that might be 10, 20, 30, 40%. Okay? Wealth taxes are not going to be 20 or 30%. Wealth taxes might be 0.5% or 1%. On the high side, maybe 2%. So if you already have a lot of wealth and it's invested in a country that's giving you high returns on your investments, so a successful economy, you might just accept that little bit of a hit. On the other hand, if you're talking about reducing inequality, wealth taxes could be part of the solution. Now, just to kind of keep things in perspective, part of it depends on what the wealth tax is used for. Again, if it's used to fund education, if it's used to fund health care, these things are investments in what we call human capital, which is the capacity for people to be productive. Now, the more productive people are, the more they produce in society, the more value they create, the more the economy grows, and the more valuable assets are.
And the stronger the country might be.
And the stronger the country may be. So it is possible that a relatively small wealth tax can be used to help increase the productivity and the growth in the economy, which could more than make up an increase in the value of the underlying assets. So again, it's not how much you're paying, it's the value of what you're getting for what you're paying.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. David Axelrod from the Department of Economics here at the Feliciano School of Business. Again, my name is Louis Biondillo, and this semester we have a whole bunch of content for everyone out there, so be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We have a LinkedIn as well, and we have tons of new content coming out. Catch our Feliciano feature coming out this Friday to find out all things that are happening within the next week, and we'll catch you guys next week for our next Feliciano Live. My name is Louis Biondillo, and I'll see you all next week.